Hello, everybody, and welcome back to True Crime Wife by Jess. This is Jess, and this is the podcast about women who kill, cold cases, cults, and stories that haunt. Before we get into today's case, which is quite a doozy, I just want to remind everyone to go check out the Facebook page for the podcast, True Crime Wife by Jess. That's where I post additional episode info and podcast episodes. Also, please remember to leave a review or give the podcast 5 stars. It helps the show get seen so more people can enjoy the crazy stories, the heartbreaking stories, and the wild ones. Today's story is a mix of all of these. But unlike our other episodes, there's no actual murder in this one, so spoiler alert. This is a story about a woman who claimed she was God, Mother God to be exact. A woman whose followers believed that she had lived hundreds of previous lives, created the universe, communicated with dead celebrities, and was preparing humanity to ascend into another dimension. But when that woman became visibly sick and her body began shutting down and she could no longer walk, the people around her didn't take her to a hospital. They continued giving her alcohol, giving her colloidal silver. They continued telling her, you're not dying. And she even said, I'm not dying, I'm ascending. And then after she died, they decorated her body with glitter and Christmas lights, transported her across state lines, and waited for her to come back. This is the story of Amy Carlson, the woman known to her followers as Mother God, and the group called Love Has Won. This episode discusses cult manipulation, alcohol abuse, disordered eating, medical neglect, conspiracy theories, child endangerment allegations, and death. So please listen with care. So who was Amy Carlson? Before she became Mother God, Amy Carlson appeared to have lived a fairly conventional life. Amy Renee Carlson was born on November 30th, 1975, in Kansas. Her parents divorced when she was young, and after they split up, both her mother and father remarried, and she and her sister Tara split their time between the two households. However, they eventually moved in with their mother and stepfather full-time after they claimed abuse by their stepmother. Amy, her sister, mother, and stepfather eventually moved to Dallas and then to Houston, Texas. Amy loved to sing and listen to music, and in school she was an A student. Family members later described Amy as intelligent, outgoing, and very driven. Like I said, she reportedly performed really well in school, and she was especially close with her younger sister, Tara. As an adult, Amy had multiple relationships, and according to sources, she had 3 children. She also worked for McDonald's, eventually rising into a management position. And according to accounts from her family, Amy was ambitious. She wanted to be successful, and for a while, she seemed to be building a normal life. She wanted to do something to make a difference, and her ambition is what pushed her to be as successful as she could be. But during the early to mid-2000s, something began to change. Amy became increasingly interested in New Age spirituality, alternative healing, reincarnation, energy work, and online spiritual communities. Nothing wrong with any of that. Now, according to the HBO documentary Love Has Won, The Cult of Mother God, which is actually where I even heard about this case, and I've watched it like 3 times. It's a 3-episode series. Highly recommend going to watch it. But according to this documentary, Amy also experimented with ecstasy around that time and began expressing dissatisfaction with her ordinary life. She seemed to believe that she was meant for something bigger, which I feel like a lot of people feel that way. There has to be more, right? And she wanted something beyond marriage, motherhood, work, and the routines of everyday existence. And that search for meaning led Amy to an online spiritual forum called lightworkers.org. This was a website that dealt with spirituality and enlightenment. It was kind of like a message board or forum. Oh, I keep hitting the mic. Whew. It was kind of like a message board or forum where people could post questions, offer insight, essentially like an online community of like-minded people. And as far as I can tell, hit the microphone again, guys. Man, I gotta stop talking with my hands. But as far as I can tell, that website no longer exists. But it was there on that website. that she met a man named Amaranth White Eagle, whose legal name has been reported as Robert Saltzgiver. It's reported that they met somewhere around 2006-ish, from what I could find. Amaranth told Amy that she was special, not simply spiritually gifted and not merely enlightened. He reportedly encouraged her to believe that she was divine. And eventually, Amy left her job, her husband, and her children very suddenly, and she moved to go and be with him. And that decision would permanently alter her relationship with her family. And I mean, why wouldn't it? She up and left. She didn't say anything that, that she was actually leaving. She didn't say, I'm going here. This is what I'm doing. She essentially abandoned her family, her children. And because of all of this, and after she left, she wouldn't have really much, if any, contact with her family, not her mother, her sister, or her children. Like I said, it would be many, many years before she had any meaningful contact with them. And even then, it was very short-lived. And this move that she made to be with Amaranth would also mark the beginning of the movement that eventually became known as Love Has Won. So Amy left to be with Amaranth, and Amy and Amaranth began building an online spiritual ministry sometime around 2007, from what I could find in the various sources. And the earliest version of the group was reportedly known as the Galactic Federation of Light. Amy became Mother God, and Amaranth was given the title Father God. They started posting videos, sharing their beliefs, and they did start to get a following. The group began posting videos online by approximately 2009, which allowed Amy to reach people far beyond the small spiritual communities that she encountered in person. And during the HBO documentary, it seemed pretty apparent at first it was an equal partnership, and Amaranth was kind of teaching her these beliefs and things. And then Amy became the more dominant figurehead and took on a more assertive lead role in this whole thing. This is also around the time that many sources state that she really cut all ties with her family. Now, over time, Amy's claims became increasingly elaborate. She claimed she was not simply connected to God, that she was God. And more specifically, Amy said that she was the embodiment of the divine feminine and the mother of all creation. Followers were taught that she was, approximately 19 billion years old, and that she had been reincarnated 534 times. And not just that she'd been reincarnated, she even claimed that she knew who she had been in previous lives. And a lot of these people that she claimed to have lived as in past lives are people that everybody pretty much knows. She was allegedly Jesus, Cleopatra, Joan of Arc, Marilyn Monroe. And somehow, within the Love Has Won belief system, those identities were not seen as contradictory. To her followers, to herself, they were proof that Amy had repeatedly returned to Earth to guide humanity. Followers also believed that she communicated with a group of spiritual advisors known as the Galactics. Now, these Galactics supposedly included angels, extraterrestrial beings, historical figures, and even dead celebrities. That's right. And one of the most prominent was Robin Williams. Yes, according to Amy and her followers, Robin Williams was one of the Galactics. And Michael Jackson was another one as well. Now, after Robin Williams died in 2014, Amy claimed that his spirit had joined her celestial team and was communicating with her from the beyond. As I said, other supposed galactic advisors included Whitney Houston, Michael Jackson, John Lennon, Steve Irwin, and even Rodney Dangerfield. Yeah, the comedian Rodney Dangerfield was allegedly helping to guide humanity from another dimension. And that's one of the reasons that this story can almost sound funny to a degree, but it really isn't, because these beliefs are very real to the people that follow it. And yeah, let's just keep talking here. So beneath the celebrity spirit guides, glitter, costumes, and bizarre live streams was a high control environment. in which people were reportedly humiliated, deprived of sleep, separated from loved ones, and taught to distrust anyone who questioned Amy. And that's something that we see in a lot of groups that we ultimately end up identifying as cults. And that part, obviously, is not funny at all, despite the people that were supposedly part of the Galactics. Now, the belief system of love has won was not something that was like an established religion. It was a constantly changing mixture of New Age spirituality, Christianity, reincarnation, extraterrestrial mythology, alternative medicine, numerology, internet conspiracy theories, and pop culture references. And at the center of everything was obviously Amy. Her followers believed that Mother God had created the universe and that the world had fallen into a lower spiritual vibration. Human beings were said to be trapped in the third dimension, which they referred to as 3D, which is a state associated with fear, ego, materialism, conflict, and separation. Amy's mission was supposedly to raise the planet into the fifth dimension, or what they called 5D. So in the fifth dimension, humanity would experience unconditional love, unity, peace, and even spiritual enlightenment, but only those who reached the proper energetic frequency would ascend. Everyone else was considered stuck in ego, and that gave the group a very convenient answer whenever anyone criticized them. Because if they're being criticized by people, oh, it's just because those people are stuck in 3D, they haven't ascended. They're not one of us. They're slaves to their ego. They're victims to their ego. So ultimately, if people didn't agree with them, it wasn't that they weren't like, oh, you're just concerned. You're not concerned. They believe like, oh, you're just not observing obvious warning signs. You're simply operating from a low vibration. So Love Has Won basically taught that ordinary society was part of a false system. They also had some issues with government institutions, doctors, banks, schools, mainstream news organizations, and sometimes even a follower's own family could be portrayed as forces that were deliberately keeping humanity asleep, which again brings in that isolation from family members. All of those people, all of those institutions were considered part of the 3D. The group also adopted elements of QAnon, and they spread numerous conspiracy theories, including false claims about COVID-19, the September 11th attack, Sandy Hook, and other major events through their live streams and all of their online stuff. Now, archived material from the group has also contained anti-Semitic, racist, and Holocaust denial content. So all of a bunch of stuff. This combination of spirituality and conspiracy theory is sometimes called conspirituality. So if you didn't know that was a word, apparently it's a word. It basically gives people two powerful messages at the same time. First, you've discovered a hidden spiritual truth. And second, nearly everyone outside the group is lying to you. And that's what kind of makes the belief system extremely difficult to challenge, because part of their belief system is literally everyone else is lying to you. So any evidence that contradicted the group became proof that the conspiracy is real because they don't agree with us. So anyone who questions the leader, Amy, becomes part of the enemy. In other words, there's some confirmation bias going on, which is something that is very real and very common, and we all can and do fall victim to confirmation bias all the time. So confirmation bias is a psychological term, and I often teach this when I'm teaching classes, at conferences, because it's an important thing to be aware of. Confirmation bias is when someone has a belief in something, and then when they're presented with evidence that contradicts that belief, they ignore it. And instead, they only focus on the evidence that supports what they believe in. This is why a lot of people spend time with people who share their beliefs, because they help to support and reinforce our belief systems. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, as long as you're aware of it and you can look beyond it. Because let's face it, our beliefs are not always correct, and we should be flexible and willing to consider other viewpoints. Either way, this is an important reason why cults and spiritual movements can be so powerful. And once you're part of the group and have adopted those beliefs, it's hard to give that up and consider that what you've come to believe isn't real, Or maybe you don't want to admit that it isn't real because you're embarrassed that, oh crap, I believed in this and I can't believe that I believed in it, but I did. Now, Love Has Won was uniquely suited to the social media era. And that is one of the other things that was kind of different from this group than what we see in like other groups that have come to be known as cults. Members posted frequently, most of the time daily. They did live streams on Facebook and on YouTube. And those streams weren't like short little live streams. They lasted for hours. Like it could be all day that they were streaming live. And the followers discussed spirituality, current events, messages from the galactics, and Amy's divine mission. Viewers were even encouraged to donate money, purchase products, schedule spiritual sessions, and eventually visit or join the group. Now, I wasn't able to find the exact number of followers, but we do know that the core group who lived with Amy and worked on getting more followers included a group of about around 12 to 20 people, depending on the time period, like what year it was, and which sources you look at. Now, for someone who felt lonely or traumatized or who was chronically ill or just felt really disconnected from traditional institutions, the broadcasts that Amy and her followers would put out there could offer an instant community. And that's something that people are often looking for. They just want to be part of a community and have people. People were not made to be solo, isolated creatures. We're social. So for people who kind of got sucked into this, they weren't simply watching a video. They were being invited into a cosmic mission. They were being told that they were special, that they were awake. They might have been one of those chosen people who would come to Earth specifically to assist Mother God. And that's important, very important, when we talk about why people join groups like this. People who become involved with cults are not stupid, usually anyway. They can, in fact, be very well educated, very intelligent. They're often well spoken, but they're searching. They're searching for something. They could be grieving, dealing with trauma, experiencing a health crisis. Maybe they just ended a relationship, or they're just looking for a purpose. And Love Has Won didn't begin by telling a new viewer, like, leave your family, surrender your money, stop sleeping, except that a former McDonald's manager created the universe. That's not what they did. It began with love, healing, community, acceptance. It was a promise that the pain in their life had meaning. And that's how people got into it. And then later it became that, no, you can't, like, your family is, they're part of the 3D world. They don't understand. Outsiders don't understand. Then it became isolation and all of that other stuff that we've talked about. Now, Directa. Wow, I am not even from Southern Maine or Massachusetts, but I just totally said Directa. Director Hannah Olson, who created the HBO series that I mentioned before, said that many followers were dealing with trauma or had just become disillusioned with traditional medical systems. And Love Has Won presented Amy as someone who understood that suffering and could offer answers that ordinary institutions couldn't. And people want to believe in that. And then once somebody accepted the initial ideas, the teachings gradually became more extreme. And that's exactly what happened. So let's talk about life inside the group. So Love Has Won reportedly maintained a core residential group of approximately 12 to 20 followers, like I said, but there were thousands of people who watched or interacted with them online. But again, I couldn't find exact numbers. Now, members moved through homes in Colorado, Oregon, California, Florida, and other locations. Now, inside the group, almost everyone was given a new spiritual name. So they didn't go by the names that they had pre-group. Instead, they had these spiritual names. So Hope, there was Hope, Aurora, Archaea, and then there were several men who kind of held the rotating title of Father God. And when they got this title of Father God, it wasn't necessarily permanent. Basically, it was whoever was romantically involved with Amy was Father God. So she had multiple romantic partners over the years who were each presented as the divine masculine counterpart to Mother God. One of the first early followers was Miguel Lamboy. Now, Miguel reportedly helped manage the money, property, logistics, and business operations. And then later on, Jason Castillo became Amy's final father god. Jason was an interesting character. Seriously, watch the documentary, and when you get to like the end of episode 2, I think is when Jason comes in, and whew, let's just, you just watch it and you tell me what you think. So Jason joined the group around 2018, and he quickly became one of the dominant personalities and the last and final father god. He was also a convicted criminal and had a drug issue, which was discussed during the HBO documentary. Jason was actually sent away from the group at one point to sober up after some meth use had become pretty extreme. And he was told, like, you need to go away and get clean and find yourself. And then he was able to come back. Former members and reports about the group kind of described an environment in which followers were expected to work long hours. They participated in live streams. They prepared products that they sold online. They had to maintain the home and attend to Amy's needs. If Amy wanted a grilled cheese sandwich, she was getting a grilled cheese sandwich, and she wasn't the one that had to make it. Sleep was also reportedly limited. So some former members have said that they were allowed to only sleep 4 or 5 hours a night. And food, Amy could have whatever she wanted, but food was restricted or could be restricted. Basically, at one point during the documentary, one of the former followers, talked about when she first joined the group, she wanted to get a piece of pizza. And somebody in the group was like, well, did you ask Amy? Like, we don't spend our money on food. So that was, for her, that was like a learning thing, but it also says a lot about how restrictive the rules were. And literally Amy was dictating every part of these people's lives. Members were also taught that like fatigue, hunger, illness, emotional distress could be evidence that they were failing spiritually. So if they were hungry, they were failing. If they were tired, they were failing. If they were upset, they were failing. If someone became upset and questioned Amy or wanted to leave, the problem would just be labeled ego, and they were failing spiritually. They needed to be better, basically. And then in a high control group, ego, that word, became a weapon. Fear was ego. Doubt was ego. Needing sleep was ego. A desire to speak to your family, also ego, which meant don't do those things. Eventually, people kind of stopped trusting their own bodies and their own instincts, and they just kind of go with it. And Love Has Won publicly preached unconditional love, so they think they're following this, unconditional love. That's what we believe in. That's what this group is about. And they kind of just lose trust in their own bodies and their own thoughts and their instincts to survive, which means eating and sleeping and, those things that are important to literally survive. But former members have also alleged verbal abuse, emotional humiliation, obviously the sleep deprivation that we talked about, coercive control, and even in some cases, physical abuse. Amy was frequently recorded shouting at followers or insulting them, and many of those videos found its way into the HBO documentary, and they're quite disturbing. So again, go watch that documentary. According to former members, when Amy drank heavily, her behavior could become especially volatile. And honestly, if you watch the documentary, she's basically always intoxicated, but there were times when she was definitely more heavily intoxicated than others. And the laugh, oh my gosh, Amy's laugh, especially when she was intoxicated, is actually kind of terrifying. And she'd like say something horrible and then she would just laugh like a hyena, but like even worse. It's honestly hard to explain and it's hard to listen to. So again, it's one of those things you'd have to watch the documentary or go and look at the videos of it to really understand what I'm talking about. But followers were expected to interpret those outbursts that she had as divine lessons. So if Mother God screamed at you, it wasn't abuse. It was because she loved you enough to expose your spiritual flaws. So again, that verbal abuse was preached as needing to be accepted. It wasn't abuse. She was exposing your spiritual flaws. You needed to do better. Now, let's talk about the business part behind the beliefs, because this wasn't just a group of spiritual people getting together and having these beliefs. It was also a business. They made some money. I think by the time that Amy passes away, the group had around over $300,000 in their account, which we'll talk about when we get towards the end here. But the group sold various products online. They sold supplements, spiritual tools, and colloidal silver. That was a big one. It actually looked like in the documentary that they were making homemade colloidal silver to sell online, which I don't know how safe that is. I don't really know a lot about colloidal silver other than it's often used for like medicinal purposes, even though there's no clear evidence that it actually supports anything like that or has any actual healing properties. But some people really do believe strongly in it. And, if you believe strongly in something, then you'll think it works. But anyway, they offered services as well, such as spiritual readings and something that they described as like etheric surgery. It wasn't actually surgery, though. It was a session that allegedly removed negative energy and spiritual blockages or illness. And an etheric, I can't even say it, an etheric surgery session was actually advertised at around $88. So each session was $88. The group's products and services were marketed using medical-sounding language, despite lacking reliable scientific evidence. So it made it sound like this stuff was really going to work and that it had scientific evidence to back it up, even though it definitely did not. Again, the colloidal silver became really important. So colloidal silver is a liquid. It contains tiny silver particles. And like I said before, it's been marketed for decades by alternative health promoters as a treatment for all kinds of different illnesses. But like I said, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration has warned that colloidal silver is not safe or effective for treating disease. And if you weren't aware, if you take it long term or take too much of it, it can actually cause like a permanent bluish gray discoloration of the skin. That's called argyria. Argyria. I don't actually know how to say that, but it's Argyria. And it can also interfere with medications and can even damage organs. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Love Has Won promoted silver products and used claims related to the virus. Like, this will keep you safe. This will cure you if you get COVID. It was like a whole thing. Now, a business connected to the group actually received a warning from the FDA over unapproved and misleading COVID-related claims. They had multiple websites going, by the way. So if one got shut down, they had others that were still up and bringing in money. And Amy eventually was consuming colloidal silver herself and in like extreme amounts, like a bottle a day. And this did result in her skin turning a bluish gray color. There are pictures. I'll post them on my Facebook page when I post the update or post the information about this episode, because it's absolutely incredible to see how long-term use and overuse of colloidal silver can really change the color of your skin. And she looks so sick in the pictures, and I feel so bad because she definitely needed help and she didn't get the help that she needed. So even like her color, like her skin discoloration, it was happening in front of her followers, but they continued interpreting like her deteriorating appearance as, she's not sick. She's having a reaction. She wasn't having a reaction to like the medicine. She was ascending. She's godly. She's Mother God. So she's not sick. She's not deteriorating. She's ascending, which is really important to realize when we're examining this group and what ultimately happened. Because it's just, I don't want to say crazy because I think people can believe whatever they want, but it's just crazy to think that she was, if you see that, look at the images from like when she first left her family and started this group to when she started to really get sick, you can see the deterioration and just how quickly it came on. And it's really sad. The documentary does a really good job of showing that transformation over time. And yeah. So by 2020, reports about the group were becoming increasingly alarming. It was becoming more known that, hey, this group exists, and holy crap, this is insane. And in May of 2020, reportedly or allegedly, a Love Has Won member was found wandering in the wilderness near the group's Colorado property. So they actually had a property in Crestone, Colorado. And this member was reportedly naked, dehydrated, and disoriented. The reporting indicated that the man had been separated from the group after being described as having the wrong energy or being on the wrong side of the mountain. So he was essentially kicked out and just kind of left out there. And that incident really intensified concerns about the treatment of the group's members. Law enforcement in Saguache, I can't, man, y'all, I am really bad at pronouncing the names of places and things, and hopefully nobody gets offended by that. I do my best. Law enforcement in Saguache is Saguache County, had reportedly received numerous complaints from concerned relatives of the members who believed that their family members were being manipulated or financially exploited. But people are adults and they can go and be wherever they want, so they would check on them, but there wasn't anything that they could do. And Love Has Won denied accusations that it was a cult. They were just a group, which most cults do deny that they're a cult. Members insisted that they were a spiritual community united by love. But by then, in 2020, Amy's condition had become increasingly difficult to hide. So in videos during that time, like I said, it's very obvious that she was thinning. Her skin was changing colors. Her skin was even breaking out, and not like acne, but like almost like blisters. Again, there's in the documentary, you can see that. I'm not going to post that because it was pretty gross. But it's like all over her body, her back, her face. And at one point, she also lost the ability to walk. She had to be carried around the home. There were videos where she would be carried out by Jason or Father God, who would put her in front of the camera. And then after, he would pick her up and take her back to wherever she needed to be. She couldn't walk on her own at that point. So in August of 2020, Amy and her followers, several of them, traveled to Kauai, Hawaii. And once she got there, the group reportedly claimed that, because I think that they thought this was going to win over the Hawaiian people, they claimed that Amy was the Hawaiian volcano goddess Pele, which that was a big mistake. For Native Hawaiians, that wasn't a harmless spiritual experimentation. It was an appropriation of a deeply significant cultural and religious figure to those people. And local residents organized protests outside the group's rental home, and the situation escalated to the point where windows were being broken, objects were thrown, and the authorities became involved. According to what I could find, the Kauai mayor, Derek, I'm not going to attempt to pronounce his last, well, maybe it's Kawakami, Kawakami. So the mayor eventually helped kind of negotiate the group's departure, and they left. And they returned to the mainland in September of 2020. So they were there for about a month and a half. Around the same period, I believe it was when Amy was still in Hawaii, she appeared on an episode of Dr. Phil. Yeah, Dr. Phil. Her family was obviously concerned about her. Her mother and sister had reached out to the Dr. Phil show thinking, if we can't get to her and make her realize that she needs help, maybe Dr. Phil can help. So they reached out to him and he invited them all to come on the show. So Amy joined virtually and her mother joined in person. I can't remember if her sister joined virtually or in person, but her mother was definitely there in person and Amy attended virtually from, I believe, Hawaii. And her family described how worried that they were about her, basically described her as a cult leader and pleaded with her to come home. And Amy denied that she was hurting anyone. And she insisted, even on that show, that she was God. And, her family thought that Dr. Phil would be able to help or convince her to get help. And that just didn't happen. It didn't end up going the way that they thought that it would. And even when they were on the show, 2 of her followers actually went on the show virtually as well and defended her and claimed that she did have extraordinary spiritual abilities. And that was pretty much it. That appearance could have been an opportunity for Amy to reconnect with reality. And it's really just gave the group more exposure. And that was it. within Love Has Won, there was a lot of criticism from the outside world, which, again, just kept reinforcing the belief that Mother God was being persecuted for telling the truth, which, again, proved to the group that what they believed was correct. We talked about that. So, the outside world, they're victims of ego and the 3D dimension, and we're not living in the same 5D world that the Love Had Won followers were, and it was a whole thing. So by late 2020, Amy is getting even more ill. She's seriously ill. Her hair was thinning. Her face is ridiculously thin. She's basically skin and bones at this point. Her skin was, again, that blue or purplish gray discoloration. She experienced severe pain, like really, really bad pain. There's videos of her, and she looks awful. You can tell that she's in pain, and she'd lost most of her ability to move. And at times, she kind of claimed, like, oh, maybe I have cancer, although there's no publicly available records to establish a confirmed cancer diagnosis because she didn't go to any doctors. And she continued consuming large quantities of alcohol and colloidal silver. It's pretty much all that she was drinking or consuming. And Jason, I don't know if they were married or just together, but he's Father God, and he continued to support that consumption. He would give her the colloidal silver. He handed her the alcohol. Yeah. And because of the group's teachings and their beliefs and what Amy had taught them, it kind of created this impossible situation. Amy claimed that she could heal others, but she claimed that disease was connected to spiritual imbalance. She was supposed to be God, so she couldn't admit that God needed a hospital, right? But at one point, and this is discussed in the documentary, she did say that she needed a hospital. She said, like, I need to go to a doctor. But her followers talked her out of it and reminded her that the 3D hospitals wouldn't even know what to do with her. They couldn't help. She was ascending. She wasn't dying. And then, Amy goes back into her mind, and yeah, that's right. I am Mother God. So her followers had built their entire identities around her divinity. So she wasn't sick because that would make her human. And she wasn't human. She was divine. They even so if Amy cried out in pain, her followers didn't interpret it as a medical emergency because they believed that she was taking on humanity's negative energy. Her physical suffering was evidence of her spiritual importance. So in the Love Has Won's belief system, Amy was supposedly processing the pain of the entire planet so that everyone else could also ascend. That meant that every sign of her declining could be transformed into proof that the mission was working. This is what we've been learning. This is what our beliefs are. This is what Amy was teaching us, and now we're seeing it in action. So near the end of her life, like I said, Amy reportedly asked to go to a hospital, and accounts vary greatly regarding exactly what was said and when, but there is footage and witness descriptions indicating that she expressed fear and pain. She even reached out to her family to try to get them to come and see her, but they didn't. And that is talked about in the documentary, and they kind of explain why, that they didn't go, that they were afraid to go, which I get, especially if you believe this is a cult, why would you want to go and put yourself in the middle of it? So followers kind of remained locked into that belief that traditional medicine was part of the lower dimensional system that they were trying to escape, so they weren't taking Amy to a 3D hospital or a 3D doctor. Which means, and this is what's really crazy about this, and why these belief systems can be so dangerous, is that the person who taught them not to trust hospitals was now the person who needed one. And the followers continued reinforcing the teachings that she had created. And I think that's one of the most disturbing elements of the story. Amy manipulated her followers, whether she did it on purpose or if she truly believed what she was teaching. But eventually, that belief system trapped her. She had created a world in which admitting that she was human would destroy everything. And the people around her had become so committed to Mother God that they couldn't properly care for Amy. That wasn't a thing. She was not being properly taken care of. They couldn't help her. And I think, so director Hannah Olson for that the HBO documentary later said, the followers were so intent on Amy being God that they neglected her humanity. And I think that's very powerful and a very accurate statement. So that gets us through 2020. So in early April of 2021, Amy and several followers had left Crestone and they went to Mount Shasta in Northern California. Now, Mount Shasta, from what I understand, has kind of long attracted New Age groups because some people believe that it contains portals, extraterrestrial bases, and powerful spiritual energy. So the group initially got there and they were staying at an RV park, but then they were asked to leave because there were too many people staying at the site. So Amy was last seen alive by someone outside the group around April 10th. And then based on later reporting and the HBO documentary, Amy appears to have died in either a California or Oregon area hotel in mid-April of 2021. The precise circumstances surrounding her death kind of remain unclear. And the reason for that is because when she died, her followers didn't notify law enforcement. And this part is covered in the documentary. So according to the accounts presented in the documentary by her followers, Amy's body was placed inside a sleeping bag, and then they transported her remains. So their concern was that the law enforcement was going to come and take her. So they put her in a sleeping bag and they left and transported her remains. At one point, they were driving with her body positioned in the vehicle wearing a hat and sunglasses so that it would look like anyone looking inside would think that she's alive, which honestly, I don't want to make light of the situation, but it kind of gave off Weekend at Bernie vibes when I read about that. So the body was moved through California and eventually back to Colorado. Now, followers believed that Amy wasn't dead. So that was part of it too. They didn't want anyone to come and take her because she wasn't dead. She had ascended. And they expected her body to either disappear or for her to return and be reanimated and alive again. Now, on April 28th or 29th of 2021, authorities entered the residence near Crestone, Colorado after Miguel. So remember Miguel, he was the person who was running their finances and stuff, and he owned the home. And he reported them to police because he got home, found everybody there, found Amy's body, and called the police. So the police go to Crestone, to the house, and they're going to find Amy's body there. And when they got there, they actually found Amy's remains in her bedroom. She was wrapped in a sleeping bag and decorated with Christmas lights. Yes, and they show part of this in the documentary as well. There was glitter makeup that had been placed around her face, and she essentially appeared to be mummified, and her skin was a blue-gray color. The remains were positioned in kind of what authorities described as a shrine. And what's really insane is there were followers there. They were constantly moving her limbs around, massaging, lotioning her. And they said that at no point did her body feel cold. They claimed that her body was warm the entire time, that she didn't get stiff, that they were able to move her limbs and stuff around. You make of that what you want. But what the police also found when they got to the home was that there was a 2-year-old child and a 13-year-old present in the home, which is where these alleged, these allegations of potential, child abuse or whatever come into play. And I don't really have a lot of information on that because they never put out there, who these children were, who their parents were, anything like that to protect them, which I get. So it's worth a short mention, but I don't have any other information about that. So when Amy died, she was 45 years old. And so let's talk about this. So her body was transported across state lines. She was never reported to being dead. Stuff was being done to her body after she died. So when the police arrived, they arrested 7 adults in the home. And initially, they faced charges that included abuse of a corpse, and some also faced allegations involving child abuse because the children were present in the home with the decomposing remains. Prosecutors also later considered more serious charges involving tampering with deceased human remains. However, and I don't know why, but the criminal charges connected with Amy's body were eventually all dismissed in September of 2021. And that dismissal didn't mean that the authorities concluded that everything had been acceptable. I'm guessing it just, maybe they just didn't have enough evidence. I mean, the prosecutors didn't proceed with the case, so there wasn't enough. I don't know. No one was convicted of causing Amy's death. That is definitely a thing, but nobody else was charged with anything either. So it's weird. I'm not really sure why. Other than maybe they just didn't have enough evidence, or maybe they were going with, it just wasn't worth it. I don't know. I know nobody was convicted of causing Amy's death, but after watching the documentary, I feel like they're all just as responsible for Amy's death as Amy was responsible for her own demise. I mean, she was a human being, not a divine whatever. They should have just taken her to a hospital. But we also have to look at this from the psychology of like what goes on in this type of group mentality and their belief system, and gotta look at it from both sides. So there's also no public finding that she was murdered, though. So the autopsy did provide a picture, albeit a devastating picture, of what had happened to her physically. Amy's cause of death was described as global decline in the setting of alcohol abuse, anorexia, and chronic colloidal silver ingestion. So her manner of death was ruled natural. Basically, her organs and everything just shut down. Her body showed the effects of severe malnutrition because she really wasn't eating. She was living off of colloidal silver and alcohol, and then chronic substance exposure. All of that alcohol, her liver shut down, her organs shut down. It just couldn't keep up. And then, of course, the colloidal silver was linked to the discoloration of her skin. In other words, the woman who claimed to possess divine healing powers died while consuming a product that her own organization had promoted as medicine. So for those listening, don't drink colloidal silver. Don't drink a bottle of it a day. It's not good for you. Don't turn blue, please. And so, yeah. So anyway, this story is complicated. Amy Carlson caused harm. I mean, she left her children. She built an organization around the claim that she was God. She accepted followers' money. She demanded obedience, and she helped create an environment where people were degraded and controlled. There are former members who've described lasting trauma. There are families who spent years trying to reconnect with loved ones. There was dangerous medical misinformation that was being spread to vulnerable people. And those are things that we should not be minimizing whatsoever. But we also have to remember that Amy was a human being who became extremely sick while surrounded by people who couldn't recognize her as a human anymore. She was the creator of the system. And in the end, she was trapped inside of it. But again, that doesn't erase her responsibility. It just illustrates how high control belief systems like this can be self-sustaining. And a charismatic leader can begin this delusion. Many of the leaders that we see of these cultish groups are very charismatic, and people want to follow them. They want to believe them. And eventually, they get these followers, and the followers defend the belief system. They repeat it, and they enforce it. So by the time Amy couldn't walk anymore and she was asking for help, the identity of Mother God had become more important than the survival of Amy Carlson. And her followers didn't see themselves as neglecting her. They believed that they were assisting the most important spiritual event in human history. So intent and impact are not the same thing. And, a person can believe that they're acting out of love and still cause terrible harm, which I think this story really reflects. So what happened to Love Has Won? So after Amy's death, it effectively dissolved under that name, but it didn't completely disappear. It actually fractured into separate groups. So Lauren Suarez, who was known as Aurora in Love Has Won, and then Ashley Peluso, known as Hope, became associated with a successor organization called 5D Full Disclosure. And they continued promoting many of the same spiritual themes, including the fifth dimensional ascension and Amy's supposed divine mission. They have a website, and you can see they have a memorial to Amy with a description of, who she was, how everything started, and about the message that she shared. And actually, shortly after Amy's body was discovered, 5D Full Disclosure appeared online with the message, quote, "God was here, she ascended, now it's our turn." And Hope and Aurora continued appearing publicly and discussing Amy as Mother God, and they participated in interviews and podcasts, including a January 2024 interview in which they were identified as representatives or followers of Love Has Won. Public promotional material has also indicated appearances discussing their experiences and continued beliefs after the HBO series, because they were both in the HBO series that I've talked about. Now, that's one branch of this Love Has Won group. And then the other branch is Jason Castillo, which was Amy's final father god, became associated with another offshoot, which generally is known as Joy Reigns, but it's also expanded phrase, also goes under this expanded phrase of Love Has Won, Joy Reigns 2. And that group has also continued using Amy's image and spiritual language while positioning Jason as the continuing divine figure. And actually, he's got a TikTok page, and it is under the Joy Reigns 1, Love Has Won 2, or whatever it was. And he does go live sometimes, so it's interesting. There is inconsistencies in the publicly available information about these offshoots. Their online pages and names have changed over time, but as of the most recent reliable reporting and public appearances that I could verify, Love Has Won on its own does not appear to exist anymore at all. Like I said, the Love Has Won and Joy, it was Love Has Won, Joy Reigns 2 does have an active TikTok page. And like I said, Jason does go live on occasion and posts at least monthly from what I could tell. And then the Fifth Dimension Full Disclosure Group has a website and podcast that appears to be fairly active. However, the former members and factions have continued promoting variations of Amy's teaching online, so it didn't disappear, it just fractured. It fragmented, which makes it kind of harder to track because there's no longer just one leader, one address, or one official organization like there was when Amy was alive. So a lot of the followers, like we said, we talked about 3 of them. Some of the other followers appear to have returned to private life. Some have left the belief system completely. Some continue to believe in Amy. Others have retained parts of the spirituality while distancing themselves from Love Has Won as an organization itself. Miguel Lamboy, who was the one that was in charge of the group's finances, was also the person who reportedly helped lead authorities to Amy's body, like we talked about. But there were also allegations from members of the group that after she died, that he stole the money. Although it's hard to steal something when everything's in your name, and everything was in his name. So even if it was technically Amy's money, it was all under his name. So there were never any charges or anything, and no proof that he actually stole anything. So nothing legally wrong there. Again, Jason Castillo publicly associates himself with Amy's teachings through the Joy Reigns offshoot. And, there's other former members who have spoken about their experiences and cult manipulation and the difficulty of rebuilding their lives. But it'd be irresponsible to claim a precise current location or occupation or belief status for every member, because it's just, there's no reliable or recent confirmation of what any of these people are doing. And the children who were found at the Colorado residence, again, they've been kept out of the public reporting, which is appropriate given their ages at the time. Amy's own children are adults now, or approaching adulthood, by the time that the HBO documentary was released. And her family did participate in the documentary and spoke about the pain of losing Amy long before her physical death. They spent years trying to reach her. After her death, they were left not only grieving Amy, but also confronting the public spectacle surrounding the condition of her body, which was definitely traumatizing. Amy's mother said that whatever Amy had done, she didn't deserve to die the way that she did. And I think that statement really does capture the tragedy without excusing the harm. Now, one of the things that I do want to talk about, this was supposed to be a bonus episode, guys, and it's already so long. I didn't realize I was talking so much. So one of the things that I just wanted to talk about, if I can remember where I'm at here. I always have notes so I can try to keep myself on track. Otherwise, my ADHD is going to take over and I'm going to be all over the place. So one of the things that I want to talk about when it comes to cults, so these high control groups create a pluralistic ignorance. So that's when multiple people privately suspect that something is wrong, but assume that everyone else must understand the situation better, so nobody does anything. So one follower did think that Amy needed a doctor, but if everyone around them acted like it was Ascension, then that person was just like, okay, they kind of question their own judgment. They're like, oh, I must be wrong. And then there's that fear, like what happens if you're the person who doubts God? What if your doubt prevents the entire planet from ascending? What if Mother God dies because your energy was negative? So there's this enormous psychological burden that the followers were facing. And then it kind of turns that basic medical care into an act of betrayal. So just something I wanted to kind of put out there. This whole group, Love as One, is a warning about how cults have evolved. A cult no longer needs an isolated ranch surrounded by fences. It can exist through a live stream, because this one did. A person can become radicalized alone in their bedroom. They can watch hours of content every day. They can donate money. They can cut off concerned relatives and develop a complete alternative worldview without ever physically meeting the leader. And we are seeing that more and more these days. Social media allows groups to repeat its message constantly. Live streaming creates this illusion of intimacy because the viewer feels like the hosts are their friends. They hear their name read on the screen and they're like, oh, they noticed me. They paid attention. They're told that they're part of the family. And the more that people watch that stuff, the algorithms on social media sites recommend more of the same material. And then it just all goes downhill from there. But what's really important to remember at Love as One is that it wasn't just a cult. It was an internet presence. It was a cult made possible by the structure of the internet. So final thoughts, because I've been talking long enough. Amy Carlson, she spent years teaching people that she was love. She told them that she was there to save humanity, and her followers surrounded her. They praised her, they served her, they defended her, and they surrendered their judgment to her. But when she became sick, none of that devotion saved her. If anything, it killed her. Love is not blind obedience. That's something to remember. Despite the fact that they were preaching love, it's not blind obedience. Love does not require you to surrender your identity. Love doesn't isolate you from your family or shame you for questioning authority or tell you that medical care is a spiritual failure. Real love allows doubt. Real love permits boundaries, and real love does not need a leader to be God. Amy built a world in which she could never admit that she was wrong. Her followers built their identities around believing her. And when reality finally became impossible to ignore, they found a way to reinterpret even death. They called it ascension. But Amy Carlson did not ascend into a waiting starship, which I didn't even talk about, but the clouds are starships. In case you were curious, watch the documentary. There's a whole thing in there. She died from a global physical decline from alcohol abuse, anorexia, and chronic colloidal silver ingestion. Her followers decorated her body, they waited, and love did not win. Thank you guys for listening to this bonus episode of True Crime Wife by Jess. I know this was a much longer episode than I anticipated it would be, considering it was supposed to just be a bonus, which I try to keep pretty short. But this episode was based on publicly available court reporting, the coroner's findings, contemporary news coverage, interviews with Amy's family and former followers from articles and documentaries, specifically the HBO documentary series Love Has Won, The Cult of Mother God. Again, highly recommend that you watch it. It's fantastic. It's a really solid documentary that I really enjoyed watching. And as always, remember that cult involvement can happen to intelligent, compassionate, capable people. The question should not simply be, how could someone believe this? A more useful question is, what need did the group promise to meet? And how did it gradually replace the person's ability to trust themselves? That is the more important question. And if you liked this episode, don't forget to leave a review and give the show 5 stars or thumbs up or whatever on whatever app you're listening on. It helps the show grow and be seen. And don't forget to subscribe and follow. True Crime Wife by Jess. wherever you listen to podcasts. And follow me on social media for more true crime stories, cold cases, women who kill, and the cases that continue to haunt us. Until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and always question anyone who tells you that doubt is dangerous. This is Jess, and I'll see you next time.